I like the development agreement proposal you've made. I've watched a neighboring city for 30 years waive sidewalk requirements on a verbal agreement with developers. And recently, in the last year or two, I see Bill may be smiling over there, knowing what I'm talking about. They recently decided they wanted to hold those developers' feet to the fire and their checkbooks to account, and let's put in those sidewalks. Well, I think part of the story was they couldn't find the agreements. They couldn't enforce the agreements, it turns out. The citizens that had built and had not put in sidewalks were hollering, "Why me, why now?" So I think that a development agreement that would have would travel with the property. I understand it would be recorded, so that if the Joneses bought this from the Springers in 10 years or 20 years, and a school goes to get built out there, and the city council and staff at that time says we need to put Thatuna through, they would know what their agreement had been previously. You made a couple of comments about not knowing how the decisions were made previously on this property when things changed and so forth. So I think it's good to make a record of what the city has agreed to and what Mr. Springer has agreed to. I do agree, or I feel that it's not fair to expect this property owner that wants to build a single-family home on a large lot have to look at $250,000 to build half of a street that the city certainly doesn't have the money to build the other half. And then we've got the gentleman that owns the corner property up there that apparently at this moment has no plans to develop it. So I think the proposal that you've made have some merit.
Other questions? Yes, Tom?
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to report from the Public Works and Finance Committee that we did hear this, and that the staff recommendations that Les showed up on the screen reflected our comfort level of the three of us at that meeting.
Okay, thanks. Now, Les mentioned that Sue, I'm sorry, please.
I just wanted to, can you go back to the slide that talks about the staff recommendations and the deferral, please? It says future development initiates reassessment, and as I understood it at Public Works Finance, what we were referring to at the time was, should someone buy the property or decide to subdivide it so there would be more than one single-family dwelling on that. And what I heard Walter say is that Mr. Jones buys the property with the one house on it and doesn't change that, and you would think that would trigger the...
It was not what I meant. If that's
Okay,
how,
all right,
if that's how it came out, that was not
Okay.
my... If I may,
That's what I heard.
My point was Mr. Jones decides to develop it
I
or to
see.
change its use to put a fourth, fifth, sixth
Okay.
house on it or something.
Okay.
No,
That's-
it wasn't.
Okay, I want to clarify that. The thing that I had not, and that had not come up at Public Works Finance is, should the city decide, let's say the school goes in on Trail Road or something, should the city decide that we need a bicycle path through there, a paved bicycle path through there, that would not require all the fill and could still have the grade or whatever. Because it would be, well, no, I'm talking about Cowabunga down the hill, but, I mean, I'm sure the high school kids would love that, but it had never occurred to me anyway that to request of Mr. Springer some contribution towards the bike path, because I do agree that, $927,000 and his share being 200 and something is horrendous. This asterisk also brings up another thought that I had discussed with Mr. Belknap at Planning and Zoning, is that there are several spots in town where people have a long lot along a street, and we had discussed, what can you do? You can't have it. Why can't we have a one-lot LID? Because this is what happens. One person gets stuck with it, and there are some other properties in town. And I'm wondering about also setting a precedent. We need to find some way. If you're going to give relief to one person, then other people should be able to apply for that too. But that ends up sticking the city with a lot of money. So I hadn't considered requiring a bond in a smaller amount for maybe future contributions to a bike path or the fencing off of the bike path or something like that. So I agree with the staff recommendations, but I was wondering what the council thought about having a condition of a bond in a smaller amount for a future bike path. Council.
Tim?
I'm not necessarily prepared to discuss the bike path issue, but I did have a question for Les. Under your recommendations, the first two want us to create an approach, concrete approach, and without turning around and looking. I think the second one is to create the approach plus a sidewalk from the east side of Ponderosa to the south side of Thatuna. And so I'm just interested in the design of that sidewalk. Would there be a rolling curb there, or would there be a standard curb? If so, if the council decided to do the sidewalk around the east side of Ponderosa, how would that sidewalk be constructed?
Well, it would meet our current standards.
Would it be a barrier to traffic that apparently is using part of that right-of-way?
I believe it's a vertical curb out there, but I can't say for sure. We would typically, the mayor's familiar with the neighborhood, it is a vertical curb, so we would match the existing curb section that is there, which would make it a barrier to vehicular traffic other than in the area of the driveway approach to the Springer property.
Okay.
We would want to look at whether or not the city would want access to the east, because we do have utilities down there, through a second driveway approach, perhaps in line with the Thatuna. We would have to think about that, and if we did do that, we might want to consider something to keep it closed to general traffic, whether it's removable bollards or something of that nature. But it would allow the city access down to the utilities that are located in the draw.
So if I may, the first two items is your recommendations. Is that an either-or?
Well, the recommendation is
You're not recommending both of those.
Yes, the recommendation is to construct the sidewalk and to do the standard driveway approach.
Which was about $7,000.
I thought the first if you go to your list of recommendations.
Well, those are the first two, and I carried them into this
There
slide.
we go.
So
The first one, if I understand it, is to create the approach. The second is to create the approach and the walk. Oh, I see.
just the walk.
I got you.
76.
Okay.
So a sidewalk and a standard driveway approach.
The asphalted street as it is now, what's its condition in that radius?
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, you could ask Mike McGann or me.
Our former street superintendent. I believe it's in fair condition out there. It's not risen to the level of needing substantial attention at this point in terms of our crack seal program or seal coat program, anything of that nature. So I believe it's in reasonable condition, similar to many residential streets in that part of the city.
And then I have one final, if you will allow that.
Sure.
The pedestrian drops, if there are any, on the east side of Ponderosa and the south side of Thatuna. Are they there, or is it just a drop-off from the existing sidewalk?
Well, you're asking questions I haven't looked at. The sidewalk on the east side ends here, and you can see the beginning of a radius on the walk, which was probably put in anticipation of the curb line continuing on around for a street section. So that one just terminates. This would be the location for a drop if there's one in existence, and again, I'm not sure. That's not something we would have looked at while we were out there. Perhaps the mayor
Well,
knows.
there's not, but there's
I
not a
didn't-
crossing there either. I mean,
Yeah,
What would-
at this
where would
point,
you
it's
be
not an
going?
intersection, right,
You know,
right.
And there's no sidewalk, because I can't see it because of the trees on the south side of Thatuna?
Through here. There's not in this stretch, and I don't think there is here yet.
right, and that section of North Cleveland was originally intended, or recently intended as a safe routes to school route, and because of budgetary constraints, bids coming in over, we omitted that from that, one of the recent safe routes to school projects.
Yeah, the first one. Right.
Thank you.
Tom?
It seems like it might be handy if there was a ped drop put in here and then one here, and then I guess the driveway would kind of function as that on this side, so that if somebody were coming here and wanted to get across, or say there's somebody visiting the Springers and wanted to shoot across in a wheelchair that way, then they would be able to use that. So it seems like it would be worth, it's an intersection between roads. It seems like there should be a ped drop there, but I don't know if it exists.
And I know there are some pedestrian safety concerns there, and just as part of disclosure, I live up Ponderosa a ways there, but, everybody is, kind of gets the willies crossing that street at that location, just because people will come around the corner pretty quickly or cut the corner with the cars. Les, did you have a follow-up?
If I may, Madam Mayor,
Please.
on Councilmember Lamar's question, certainly installing ADA ramps in the area of new sidewalks, so in this vicinity, and
That's
then
easier, yeah.
perhaps in combination with the driveway here, it may not be exactly in this location or this size, so it could be that they could both be located there. I think that is very doable within this recommendation. Going to the northwest corner, because it is not adjacent to the site, and really starts to become remote from the area, and the question of impact comes into play. I think that would be more challenging for us to require, but it is, if there are going to be ramps placed here, it can become one of the more, priority type sites for ramps by the city, here in the coming near term.
Okay, I'll stay focused on the requirement part of it, not the would be nice if it existed part of it.
Certainly.
Walter?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Les, not trying to get you to come to a conclusion on whether or not to allow traffic to go east on Thatuna on into the right-of-way, as they apparently, from the pictures, doing now. There's nothing that precludes you from transitioning to a straight-back curb, to a roll curb, where it starts there on the east side of Ponderosa.
That is correct.
You could build it
can
as
do that.
you could build it as a roll curb if you decided that's the best way to do it.
It certainly can be done, yes.
Sue? Did I see your hand up? Oh, anybody? Tim?
Well, I guess just lowering the shotgun here. I don't see the need for a sidewalk. I'm on the Transportation Committee. I'm as interested in mobility as anybody else. But if that street ever gets constructed, it's all going to come out. It seems like a huge waste of money at this time to, one, and two, if it is a rolled curb, that's one thing, that'd be the better of the two. But if it's a vertical curb, it prevents access into that area without ruining your tire. And with no continuation on up the south side of Thatuna, I'm not sure we've gained a lot by forcing a sidewalk around that radius.
Well, sidewalks start
If I could
somewhere,
speak
bit
to
by
that.
bit. Walter?
Thank you, ma'am. Tim, if Cleveland was in the Safe Routes to School plan and was dropped because of funding, that would lead me to believe that it could come back up again in the not as far distant future as possibly the construction of Thatuna. If you've got children coming up north up Cleveland on a new sidewalk, if you don't put in this radius sidewalk and they live on the right hand or the east side of Ponderosa, they're going to have to cross streets twice to get over to their house. Where if this sidewalk's put in, they just wrap around.
But don't they do that in every intersection in Moscow? I'm not arguing.
In this one, they wouldn't have to, is what I'm saying. They would just come north up Cleveland, turn right, follow this radius around, and go on up Ponderosa to the north, already on that side of the street. You would just seem to be asking, why in the world would we want a sidewalk there? I just thought of that as a reason.
Well, if the street ever goes in, it'll come out. I mean, we
That's
could
true.
put the ped drops in that are going to be required at the intersections, as if it were a square intersection.
If I may,
Please.
and not, I'm not trying to decide all that here and now, but in front of my house is a very large hammerhead curb and guttered turnaround. A majority of which, well, about half and half is city street and the property owner across the street from me. If the street ever goes through, it's been there 20 years. When and if the street goes through, I presume he will be allowed to recapture his yard, unless he wants to make it into his private basketball court. But it's there temporarily against the street extension, which doesn't go through now. I would contend that this is something of the same kind of thing.
Tom?
I guess I'm favorable to the sidewalk going through. I'd rather just make sure we get it right, and if we have to change it later at some point, 20 years from now, then that might happen, but I'm not really seeing that that's going to happen in the short term anyway.
Okay. So, Sue.
Well, I'm ready to make a motion.
So I was going to invite some comments.
Oh, okay,
And-
more
yeah.
comments. Okay,
So
great.
Mr. Springer, we heard Les mention that Mr. Springer is here and a representative, and you'd be welcome to add some comments to this if you think there's some things you'd like the council to know before they vote. Anybody? He says that's fine. Okay. Anybody else like to speak to this project? I see some neighbors around here. Nancy? And, I know you were just up here, but please identify yourself for our record.
Nancy Nelson, 804 East E Street, and I use this stretch quite a bit, and I would suggest that this is already a pedestrian pathway, and one of the slides that had snow that shows the top, you'll see there's footprints in the snow, and I think people are using that as a foot connection to Mountain View now, and I think any pedestrian activity in that area makes the presence of a sidewalk all the more useful, even if it's only there for 15 or 20 years.
20 years.
Okay. And kind of in keeping with Sue's comments about pedestrian paths, so I'd welcome the council's discussion of that. Anybody else want to comment? Okay. Les, did you have something more to add? Okay.
Sue was going to make a
Sue?
motion.
Well, I was just going to move, can we go back to the rest of the staff recommendations? Yes, thank you. I would move that we accept the request for the waiver of public improvements to Thatuna Avenue and follow the staff recommendations of requiring the construction of concrete approach, require the installation of the walk to meet existing on east side of Ponderosa, and definitely retain the Thatuna right-of-way for public bike or pedestrian access future options, and to require the development agreement with the minimum improvements requirements, the project-specific findings, the deferral of remaining improvements, and the future development initiating reassessment.
Second.
Oh, wait, Leston wants to change his recommendation.
Les?
And actually, I think the
Please.
city attorney would like to address
City
the same
attorney,
issues.
yes.
I think that those are inconsistent. You can either waive the requirements, or you, which is one option, or you can require the improvements as they've been listed and as staff recommends.
Okay.
Would you like to rephrase your motion,
I will
Sue?
rephrase that, my motion to require the improvements that staff recommends with their conditions.
That
Okay,
list
and-
of conditions.
And pardon me for asking the question. Did you want to follow up on your original discussion about the council's consideration of bicycle
I got
pedestrian path?
no interest in that, so if I get no support, I'm not going to hang myself out to dry on that one,
Okay,
much as I'd like to see it.
so we have Sue's motion.
And I
Second.
second.
Tom's second, with that modified language?
Yeah.
Okay. Walter?
two things, if I may, one for Les. The last item on your list, the future development there refers to this property, not to the construction of a high school at the far end of the second 90 degree of Mountain View.
Yes,
Is that correct?
yes, that is correct. It would be specific to this parcel of land.
The phrase future development initiates, okay.
Correct.
And if I may, the second one for the city attorney,
That's what I was understanding, hopefully.
I don't, can you put the code section up, please? I never argue with the city attorney. We discuss things, but I never argue with him. Whose original motion, I thought, was effectively canceling this, or, as it says there, specifically waiving by the council this code section. And then she was adding the things that we do want done. I didn't see the two as being inconsistent with each other.
Randy, would you like to respond to this?
I'd have to say that I do. The only reason that the city has the ability to require public improvements is that through the Local Land Use Planning Act, it's been given that authority, and then it's adopted specifically 515 as reciting the authority from the state code that lets it, the council, require public improvements. If you waive your authority, you have no authority to require public improvements. And so the way I understand the code is that 515 gives you the authority to require public improvements, but you can modify those public improvements that are automatically required by your specifications and your requirements for curb, street, gutter, sidewalk that are in your standard drawings. So what is happening here is if he was required just to improve the street as we've discussed, he'd have to spend a lot of money to do it. And you're only modifying, you're not waiving those requirements, you're modifying the requirements that would usually be imposed upon the development that he's doing here. And the idea is you can only mitigate the impacts, and these impacts are not the full impacts that full development would require. That's why we're asking for a development agreement to be entered into, so that if there are more densities or more uses or an increase or change in those uses, the council retains its authority to require the public improvements that it would but for this modification.
Does that answer your question, Walter?
Well, I believe the city attorney understands the council's intent, and I trust that since he's going to be a party to the writing of the development agreement, it'll all come out well in the end.
Okay. Is there other discussion before voting? Tom?
My only question is, if we are modifying rather than waiving, do we need to produce a good faith reason why we're doing that instead? Or is that just going to be handled in the development agreement?
The latter.
Okay, thanks.
It seems to me that your intent is that you've recognized that the impacts aren't as great as they otherwise could be, and that you're making a modification which you want to be put in a development agreement. And we would write the development agreement that recognizes that, and then leaves to another time the ability for this council or a future council to require the balance of the public improvements based upon the mitigation that you'd need because of the increased stress on the ability of the city to maintain its level of service.
Okay, thanks.
Tim?
And do we need to specify the style of curb, since it's beginning to sound like we're going to put a sidewalk around that radius?
Les, comment?
Actually, no, we would not at this point. I mean, the issue here is really with respect to the need to make public improvements that meet the city standard. And so engineering staff will take a look at the standard that would be applicable in this location, the existing conditions that are out there.
Thank you. And I'd like to hear the motion as it's been reworked, resmithed.
I think Sue read it
You don't
off
have to read
the
all
page
those.
there.
Randy, help me here.
You don't have to read all that stuff, do you?
It's that.
No, I
Essentially that.
That.
Yeah, that the,
That's the motion, without any mention of waiver.
correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and so we have Sue's motion, we have Tom's second. Is there further
Actually, I
discussion?
think Dan seconded.
Dan has a
Second.
No, Tom seconded.
Tom seconded, Dan?
One other thing, I guess, if we want to maintain some sort of access to that right of way from Thatuna and from that intersection down there, is that going to be staff figuring something out as far as whether removal bollards, some sort of barricades or whatever? Nothing that we need to include in this.
Yeah, that is correct. Staff will take a look at it. Really, what we're looking at right now are the requirements of the applicant, and then we'll work with him, as we do with others, if there are some specific city needs for city purposes that need to be addressed, where we might have some participation, maybe in a ramp or something of that nature for our vehicle access.
Okay.
Seeing no more discussion then, we're going
Were
to...
you waving your hand again?
Well, staff was discussing, I wanted to make sure they had no further issues, but since they're all staring at us to vote, I'm ready whenever you are, Mayor.
Sue's motion, we have Tom's second for the adoption of the staff recommendation up there. And so we'll start the roll call vote with you, Walter.
Thank you, ma'am. Aye.
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 Okay, that motion carries. Thank you, and thanks, everybody who came here to represent that concern. Looks like the neighbors are happy.